Hi, I'm Molly Miller, and I'm going to be discussing John Adair's Not Bosses, But Leaders, How to Lead the Way to Success. So our author was born in 1934 in England. He started his career as a platoon leader in the Scots Guard in Egypt before quickly going on to being a professor in leadership. He's one of the first in the world to have done so. He started in 1979 at the University of Surrey. His main focus while teaching leadership has been that leadership can be taught. It's not necessarily something that we are born with. He has authored more than 50 books on this subject, and they've been translated into 25 languages. The target and purpose of Not Bosses But Leaders is to encourage managers to simply want to be effective leaders. The book's entirety is an executive at a failing company discussing leadership qualities and leadership strategies with John Adair and trying to come up with kind of the best way to approach the situation. Leadership can be taught and demonstrated by any individual by understanding the drive it takes to become a great leader. The title of this book actually came from a quote from one of John Adair's colleagues. He said to John, what industry needs now is not bosses but leaders. Iceberg, right ahead. That pertains to one of John Adair's main focuses in a theory that we have seen in a lot of his other books. It's the 3 circles of leadership: task, team, and individual. So the task is the top of the iceberg, the part that we see all the time. And the stuff that's kind of underneath would be the team and the individuals that make that team. So he uses the iceberg analogy to kind of explain this, and it's the leader's job to make sure that these 3 parts stay cohesive, because if one starts to crack, they all start to break down. So leadership or management. A leader cannot be a leader if the subordinates do not accept him. In this book, the 2 explore leadership details, including what makes a good leader, and they kind of decide on characteristics like direction, inspiration, team building, role modeling, and acceptance. Past series prior to this book have kind of looked into management and leadership being separate. John Adair brings them together, noting that they are separate ideas, but that they rely on each other. You can be a manager who takes care of the daily tasks and is more of the boss, but in order to be a leader, they need to find ways to be inspiring and deserving of the respect of their followers. Adair and his executive discuss that an atmosphere in need of change may see the natural formation of a leader, and change may occur. So in that regard, managers and leaders are different, but no less dependent on each other for progress. So the strengths of this book are many. One of my favorites is the nameless executive. Adair talks entirely in this book to an executive that never has a name, and that makes it very easy to relate to him. He's discussing issues that can come up really for anyone, not necessarily someone who's the CEO, and it does make you feel like you could be in his spot and you could really take some of these ideas into your own. So the summation of what makes a good leader is one that tries to be a good leader. This is the main idea that's discussed in this book, and it's exceptionally innovative. It's not exceptionally innovative or rare, but it is something that's really resonated a lot with me, and I find it to be a big strength. At the very beginning of this book, Adair addresses the executive post their conversation after he had implemented a lot of these ideas, and the executive said to him, "They're allowing me to lead more and manage less." The weakness of this book really pertains mostly to how it is structured. It is a conversation between Adair and this subject, and so a lot of times it felt categorized unnaturally. Sometimes the conversation would stop in odd places and restart, and so it made the book at times a little confusing. And then oftentimes the author did not signify who was talking to whom, so we weren't quite sure who was sharing which idea. I do feel like John Adair did achieve his objectives. The author was trying to inspire leaders, and so his main point was to show that whether or not somebody is titled an executive, it is specific that they don't necessarily need to be a boss to be a leader. Anybody can be a leader. So never expect any one person to supply all the leadership a group or organization needs. So you can't always look to your leaders. Sometimes you do have to look to the frontline staff or to the lower level staff to be leaders as well. Most leadership is done from marginal positions. It is unpaid and unrecognized. So the author does not accept not being in a leadership role as an excuse to not be a leader. You can rise to be a leader and you can really take on that role. Recommendation of this book. I recommend this book for anyone who feels that their role has an expectation of inspiration and leadership. So it's an inspiring book. It really does have a positive influence. So one need not be born into leadership. One of the main things he does talk about is that no matter what your job is, you always walk in with 3 hats: a leader, a subordinate, and a colleague. Whether that's the CEO of a company or the janitor, you're always going to be wearing one of those. So I found it to be really inspiring and to have the main idea that we are all leaders. Thank you.